Hey, Paul!
Hello there guys, this is Richard, your host. Hey folks, how have you been? We're back with another marvelous video, and this time we'll be talking about one of the most well-known serial killer movies ever made, American Psycho. While most of us are more than familiar with the directorial work of Mary Harron, did you know that the movie is actually based on a 1991 book by Bret Easton Ellis? Yeah, this cult classic has only garnered more popularity over the years, making it a must-watch and also being hailed as Christian Bale's best work. While we agree that the film undoubtedly portrayed the psyche of a sardonic serial killer in a very gruesome yet engaging fashion, did you know that the original book is slightly different in certain key aspects? A lot of fans agree that the book is straight up horrific and can be very difficult to read, not just because of the gory theme, but also the fact that it begins quite slow-paced. However, once it picks up the pace, the readers are not given a moment of respite. You have Patrick Bateman, the lead character and antagonist, fulfilling his murderous needs all over town, with very carefully planned details. Patrick Bateman is a Wall Street employee by day who seemingly has it all. A great job, loads of money, beautiful fiancée, and apparently the perfect life, except that he moonwalks as a psychotic serial killer. It's hinted that Bateman is aware of how shallow and empty his life is, which is why he hates himself. But his hatred for the rest of the world takes the cake. For a film that's nothing less than extremely brutal to watch, it's also very intriguing. And this can only be thanks to the brilliant writing of the author, who's created Bateman's character with such complexity that it keeps the audience wanting more and less at the same time. Christian Bale did one hell of a job bringing the character to life as well. And so, in today's video, we'll talk about the story of Patrick Bateman and how the cult classic movie deviated from the original storyline in certain ways. On a serious note, this movie isn't for the weak of heart, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
And though I can hide my cold gaze, and you can shake my hand and feel...
Beginning of the story. Book readers can spot a major difference in the movie right at its very beginning. In the book, Patrick Bateman and his colleagues are seen going over to Patrick's fiancée Evelyn's place for a party in a taxi, and it's at this party that Bateman meets Evelyn's artist friends. This isn't shown in the movie, which instead begins at a restaurant, where Patrick and his colleagues are seen wining and dining. It may seem like this deviation is not a big deal, but it allows for a more cinematic experience since the ending of the movie also takes place in a restaurant. The director probably wanted the movie to appear in a closed loop, beginning and ending on a similar note.
Don't touch the watch.
Bateman had a thing with his watch. Did you know that Patrick Bateman is shown to have a slight obsession with his watch? It's specifically mentioned to be a Rolex Datejust 16013, a pretty pricey model. It makes sense for a Wall Street guy to own such a watch. After all, Bateman is shown to be extremely rich in both the book as well as the movie. And maybe because of its price and value, or because of any sentiment being attached to it, Bateman has a certain obsession with his watch. Hey, an obsession with a watch is understandable. I mean, for a guy who liked to hack up people left and right, we can surely forgive this, right? In fact, it needs to be highlighted that he mentions the watch for a grand total of 26 times in the book. Now, that's all fine, but there was a slight issue with the mention of the luxury watch company. The people at Rolex were not very happy that their product made it to such a controversial book about a serial killer, and even took a somewhat central role in being the antagonist's obsession. As a result, when the movie was being filmed, Rolex explicitly asked the producers to not mention the name or brand of the watch in the movie, and this is observed in the scene where Patrick tells two prostitutes he'd hire to stay away from the watch and not touch it, when the actual line in the book is, "Don't touch the Rolex." Violence is a little toned down. The book is actually banned in many countries because of how gruesome and detailed the depictions of violence are. I mean, the author has dedicated page after page describing every single encounter Bateman had with the unfortunate victims. In comparison, the violence shown in the film is considerably mellow. That was probably not the best word to use in this context, but well, if you've read the book, you'll know that Patrick Bateman in the entire movie is far less explicit than his book counterpart. Don't get me wrong, the film does show an excessive kind of violence because after a while you just get used to the blood splatters. But then again, these scenes are far more implicit and toned down so that the film can be aired to a wide audience, as well as to not go beyond censorship limitations, of course. In the book, however, the scenes depicting violence are needlessly creative and stretched out beyond requirement. I guess that's what makes the book a good fit for the horror genre. In the book, Bateman's shown to be a completely inhuman character, while the movie still leaves a very, very, very tiny room for redemption, which is seen in how his character has a somewhat revered status among horror aficionados. Basically, if you think the movie went over the line with the violence, the book will downright destroy you. And I'll give you an example. In one scene, Bateman rips out eyeballs and tortures his victims with steak knives, and just think of the worst thing a killer can do. He goes beyond. And well, it's a book, So the readers are open to imagining his depravities in any way they can. And if you ask me, visualizing something like this is always scarier than actually seeing it happen on screen, because you'll obviously not be shown the whole extent of it. In an interview, the director and screenwriter of the movie actually said that they toned down some of the violence that was depicted in the book because they ultimately wanted to prove a point through Bateman's character, which is that he was simply a cold-blooded, narcissistic, psychotic serial killer. However, they decided to draw a line between violence and needlessly graphic content because the sheer depiction of violence the way it is in the book would have simply been a disturbing spectacle and would have somewhat taken away from the character of Bateman. Bethany's death. Bethany is Patrick's ex-girlfriend and one of his victims. In the book, her death is far more explicit and gruesome than in the movie. In the book, the duo meet for lunch, and Bethany is pleasantly surprised to see that they're having a good normal conversation instead of simply yelling at each other, which was their usual routine when they were together. The expectant Bethany then believes that Patrick must have changed his ways, and she goes back with him to his place only to get killed with a mace, get stabbed over and over, and get her fingers bitten off. Yeah, you heard that right. Patrick bit off her fingers. And for those of you watching this video, no matter how crazy your exes have been, this is really not the way you exact payback. No. In the movie, Bethany's shown meeting up with Patrick for lunch, and in fact, he also writes a poem for her. Pretty romantic, right? Well, maybe not. When they go back to his place, Patrick kills her by suffocating her with a plastic bag and then shooting her over and over again with a nail gun. Is it disturbing? Absolutely. Is it more disturbing than Bethany's death in the books? Hell no. This scene is a major one that depicts how the director toned down the violence in the movie compared to that in the book, but still managed to make a considerably gruesome statement. Cooking of victims' body parts. If you think that stabbing and biting off fingers is the most Bateman will go to, well, you're in for quite a surprise. In the book, he's shown to be making a human sausage out of one of his victims. The details are obviously needlessly explicit and gory, and could actually point out cannibalistic tendencies in the character. After all, he did bite off his ex-girlfriend's fingers too. I mean, for this deranged dude, cannibalism could be a very normal phenomenon. Coming back to the human sausage, when Bateman is cooking his victim, he's seen crying quite sincerely. No, it's most definitely not because of regret, come on, how could you even think that? Cries because he wants to cook the person well. But unfortunately, he's never cooked anything before, and thus has no idea how to cook anything. Like I said, imagine the worst thing he can do, and he goes a step further. Homophobia of Bateman. In the book, Patrick Bateman is shown to be an extremely homophobic character. Not only does he constantly criticize and berate gay people, but he also brutally murdered a gay man who had unfortunately tried to hit on Bateman at Central Park. Wait, there's more. He also strangles the man's dog to death because he was so sickened by a gay man hitting on him. In the movie, Christian Bale's character is decidedly homophobic since he uses expletives against gay people, but doesn't show himself to be excessively violent against them. There's a scene where his colleague Lewis Carruthers shows off a rather flashy and good-looking business card to the gang, and Bateman tries to strangle him to death in the restroom of a pricey restaurant out of jealousy. Carruthers, however, considers this to be a way for Patrick to show his affection, and he declares that he's gay and likes Patrick. In response, Bateman feels so revolted that he ends up fleeing the scene. Christy's role and her death. Christy is a sex worker who Patrick hires on occasion in both the movie and the book. It's interesting to notice how the women in his life are either madly in love with him, like his fiancée Evelyn and his secretary Jean, or they absolutely despise him, as Christy does. In both the book as well as the movie, Christy's shown to be somewhat scornful toward Bateman, and she only accepts his offer out of desperation. She locks eyes with the other woman during her first threesome with Patrick, and is always shown to be very cautious and uncomfortable in his presence. While our serial killer is probably aware of this in some way, he fails to fathom the level of loathing Christy has for him, maybe because of his narcissistic and self-involved nature. In the movie, Christy's character is straight up even more fed up with him and his antics than in the books. Christy gets killed by Patrick, of course, in both the movie and the book. However, the manner of her death is different. In the movie, Bateman drugs his acquaintance Elizabeth and then has sex with her and Christy. And then, because he wants to, he ends up killing Elizabeth. Christy runs at this, and she comes across several corpses, all courtesy of Patrick, when she searches for the emergency exit. She almost makes a narrow escape, but he drops a chainsaw on her from above, killing her instantly. In the book, Christy doesn't receive such a merciful death. She's tied up and gagged as he kills Elizabeth, and then stabs her about 6 times, and then bends over to inhale the scent of her blood as it spurts out in jets. She becomes rigid and starts thrashing about with him holding her down, as her mouth fills with blood that falls out along her chin. It's quite a poetic description of her torture and eventual death. The movie version is slightly inspired by the iconic Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which plays in the background while Patrick does sit-ups before killing Kirsty. Her death in the movie is subjectively a cinematic brilliance, because it humanizes her character and really makes the audience root for her to get out of the serial killer's clutches alive. The few moments where she's chased by Bateman with a chainsaw manages to make the audience sympathize with Christy and pray for her safety, which isn't seen in the book, which is more seen as a narration from Patrick's point of view, and hence there's no empathy for the victims. kill count changed, whether it's to save on screen time or simply save the audience the trauma. In the movie, the director adjusted the kill count of our deadly antagonist. In the book, he kills more than 50 people before the climax and ending. And these are not just off-screen deaths. All of them are described down to the nastiest, goriest detail by the author. In the movie, Bateman has about 23 victims who are counted on screen. However, in a scene with his secretary, he's seen reading from a notebook that mentions a higher number. This can only prove that he killed more people in the movie. But those deaths were all off-screen and not shown as part of the movie. It's also interesting to note that the murders that are not shown in the movie or are hinted to have taken place off-screen are actually the most gruesome and horrifying ones from the book. It can only be concluded that changing the kill count was an executive decision taken by the director to make the movie less gory and to also not make it all about the tragic deaths. As I mentioned, director Mary Harron wanted the film to focus more on the character of Patrick Bateman as opposed to simply being a movie where people get killed in the most mindlessly terrifying ways. Bateman's confession. Even serial killers are human beings at the end of the day and have a conscience. This might be quite a shocking statement to make in light of American Psycho, but it's depicted when Patrick Bateman has an epiphany after killing quite a lot of people and comes to the conclusion that he's a deeply disturbed human being. In the book, he's seen saying that he's losing his mind to an escort who he'd called to his apartment. In the movie, this was changed slightly. This conversation happens, but not with an escort. Instead, Patrick confides in his secretary, Jean. She's shown to have expressed very affectionate feelings for her boss throughout the movie. And of course, Bateman knows about her feelings, which is why he probably thinks of her as the perfect outlet to undo his emotional garbage. Overall, in the book, his character is far more complex and disturbed than what's been shown in the movie. The novel does a brilliant job of delving deep into his twisted psyche and explaining, but not excusing, his obsession with violence and materialism, as well as his narcissistic side. It shows that even he, as a seemingly cold-hearted serial killer, has his own mental contradictions and struggles. His inner turmoil and depth of character are explored very thoroughly in the book, while the movie doesn't humanize him in any way by showing any of this. It focuses more on storytelling and his actions, as opposed to his internal monologue. Why is Bateman doing all these things? The novel lays down a very detailed groundwork that meticulously explains why Patrick does what he does. Before killing anyone, he always offers a very detailed reasoning behind his decision. He points out the person's habits, ways, and beliefs, and in some way finds a reason to kill the person. While it's not explicitly mentioned whether he considers the reasons justifiable enough to commit murder, the author indicates that he makes the decisions after a lot of thinking, which gives the readers an insight into his troubled mind. In the film, there's no such explanation given for most of the on-screen murders, and it's simply implied that they're the handiwork of a serial killer's fantasy. A lot is left for the audience to figure out on their own because some murders are truly baffling and make the audience feel like they could have been avoided. Mind you, this in no way affects the flow of the story, which moves pretty smoothly. It's possible that this was done on purpose so that Bateman's character wasn't given any fodder on which he could garner sympathy from the audience. As I mentioned, the film doesn't aim to humanize him or justify his actions. It simply portrays him as a troubled young man and a frightening serial killer. I personally feel the director did a good job with this because movies can be highly impactful, and had they included Bateman's reasonings for his killings, well, it would have simply made a cause and effect situation where his character could be sympathized with. Instead, the movie focuses less on his psyche and more on that of his victims, which is a much more healthy way of describing a serial killer's exploits. Bateman's favorite musicians are not part of the movie. As with his watch, Patrick's madly obsessed with his favorite musicians. In fact, if you've read the book, it'd seem like a part serial killer story and a scathing commentary on the music industry in the other part. 3 whole chapters in the book are dedicated solely to his favorite musicians: Whitney Houston, Phil Collins, and Huey Lewis. These chapters are quite significant if the reader wants to understand the complexities behind Patrick's psyche and the overall empty nature of yuppie culture. This fact isn't present in the movie, maybe because the time the movie was released, most of these singers were not as popular as they were before. Of course, there are references to music, as seen when Patrick talks about his taste in music while murdering his victims. However, the full-blown obsession with musicians isn't something shown in the movie. Do you know that when the movie was released, Phil Collins was actually sent a copy of the book as well? In a 2016 interview, Collins mentioned that while he didn't read the book immediately, he'd watched the movie and liked it. However, Collins had refused to meet with Christian Bale earlier after the movie was released, and when Bale met his daughter Lily Collins years later, she mentioned that her father was probably upset about being featured in such a disturbing book, which is why he'd refused to meet with Bale, the man who played Patrick Bateman. Age of Donald Kimball's character. Another minor but nevertheless important detail that is different in the movie from the book is the age of Detective Kimball. In the book, Detective Donald Kimball is said to be a young and ambitious officer who's relentless in the pursuit of justice, and it's hinted that he's quite similar to Bateman in age, who's between 26 and 27 years old. Naturally, we can assume that in the books, Detective Kimball was also in his 20s. In the movie, the character's played by Willem Dafoe, who was in his 40s at the time. Therefore, the movie made Detective Kimball much older than his age in the book. Moreover, in the book, Bateman and Kimball meet only once. In the movie, the detective visits his Wall Street office twice and also goes for lunch with Bateman's value of female characters. A very interesting part of both the book American Psycho and its movie adaptation is how the women in Patrick Bateman's life are treated. Women are simply seen as social commodities and sexual objects through Bateman's eyes, and it's also revealed that most of his victims are women, which can point to a deep-seated hatred of women in his twisted brain. Patrick only sees women as fodder to enhance his social status or boost his self-confidence. This kind of severe dehumanization is a result of objectification and is eventually the cause of the inhumane deaths of the women in the book and the movie. Patrick's innovative murders take on a more creative side only with women, which can mean that they're his favorite target. In fact, his hatred and scorn of them is vividly expressed when he feeds urinal cakes to his fiancée Evelyn by disguising them as chocolate. In the book, there's basically no difference between how he sexes women and tortures them. The author is very explicit in the commodification of women and how it feeds Bateman's needlessly materialistic desires. The movie is a different story. It was directed and written by women, so the treatment of the female characters is a deviation from that of the book. The men in the movie are portrayed as almost one-dimensional, as there's nothing more to their personality than making money, having sex, or riding the corporate ladder. In comparison, while the women also show a lot of superficiality, they seem to possess some emotional identity as well. Evelyn's seen trying to pick up the pieces of a broken relationship. Jean is seen adoring and almost placing Bateman on a pedestal, and Christy is very much in touch with a hatred towards him. It's suggested that the author didn't deliberately write the female characters with less effort, but rather, since the book is narrated from Patrick's point of view, he simply treats the women as a means to an end. This is not the case with the movie, and as such, the audience really ends up feeling genuinely bad for all of Bateman's victims, but more especially for the women in his life. Thrill and fun ride is not for the book. If you've read the book, you'd probably find it to be needlessly explicit, horrifying, and also quite boring. And there's a very good reason for that. You see, the author is in no way trying to hide just how inhumane and psychopathic Bateman is. She's also trying to highlight that the guy is a complete bore. She wants you to hate Patrick, not only because he's a serial killer, but because he's a yuppie. The book is around 400 pages long, and it's a severely critical commentary on yuppie culture. Right from the murders to Patrick's reasoning behind killing someone and the explicit nature of the deaths, the author connects them all to the insanely soul-crushing yuppie culture that was prevalent in America at the time. The book certainly goes a long way in making sure the readers absolutely despise Bateman for his obsession with materialism and consumerism. The book is a gateway to his mind, and it's just so undimensional, banal, and boring that you'd literally want to just kill the guy yourself. His inner monologue reflects the mindless nature of a person who can't imagine life beyond luxury, sex, and of course, murder. In comparison, the movie's been made in such a manner that even though you'd want to, you'd not be able to take your eyes off the screen for a moment. The pacing of the story is great. It'll keep you on your toes and constantly make you wonder what the psychotic man will do next. In short, the film American Psycho is far, far more interesting than the book. Say what you will, the movie version of Patrick Bateman is somewhat tolerable and, to an extent, even entertaining. Book Bateman, though, will bring out the animalistic nature in you simply by being unrealistically boring and inhumane. Did he really kill all those characters? One of the biggest controversies surrounding American Psycho, both the book and the movie, is whether the murders actually happened. Bateman's portrayed as a very unreliable narrator right from the beginning in the book. Therefore, the author leaves the possibility open for all of the events to simply take place inside his deeply disturbed mind. This is strengthened in the case of Paul Allen, a sort of business rival of our serial killer, who's killed by Bateman's men. After killing Allen, Patrick concocts a story that the former has shifted to London and won't be coming back to America. Later, however, when he visits Alan's apartment, he sees it all cleaned up, and a very mysterious real estate agent asks him to leave and never come back. This begs the question, how did the apartment get clean? Did Bateman actually kill Alan? Did the real estate agent clean up the apartment so that it could go on the market again? While this happens, Bateman runs into his lawyer and sort of confesses to killing Alan. His lawyer says that he recently had dinner with the same Paul Allen in London, which means he's obviously alive. And this is where the audience starts questioning everything. If Paul Allen is alive, then Bateman obviously didn't kill him. So did he also not kill the remaining victims? However, it's also possible that the lawyer simply had dinner with someone resembling Paul Allen and that Patrick had very much killed the real Paul Allen. In that case, what happened to Alan's apartment? Who cleaned it? You see, it becomes a vicious cycle from here on out. However, there's one point in the book that kind of brings everything to reality. A cab driver recognizes Patrick and accuses him of having killed another cabbie, saying that Patrick's picture was on a wanted poster downtown. However, the same cab driver then robs Bateman of his watch and belongings, which is again a commentary on the naked face of materialism and consumerism. Even then, it remains a mystery whether the murders actually happened or if Patrick Bateman's mind was slowly disintegrating into psychosis and making him experience events from his imagination in real life. In the movie, however, it's hinted that Bateman is indeed a troubled serial killer, and that all of his victims are real. It provides a much more definitive ending to his character by doing away with the ambiguity of the novel. In fact, director Mary Harron had said that a lot of the film's audience thought that everything happened was a dream, but wasn't what she wanted to portray in the movie. She's definitely asserted that Patrick was very much a serial killer. Bateman's routine and other characters' description. Something that's been a recurrent theme of comic relief in American Psycho is Patrick Bateman's morning routine. Of course, it aims to further explore just how obsessed he is with materialistic and superficial things and designer labels. It's mentioned that he uses a gel ice pack if his eyes are puffy in the morning, which he squeezes in some workouts. This is followed by a deep pore cleanser lotion and a water-activated gel cleanser. He uses a honey almond body scrub in the shower, followed by an exfoliating gel scrub. If you think this is getting boring, well, hold on to that thought. He then uses a herb mint facial mask, which he keeps for around 10 minutes, followed by an aftershave that contains little or no alcohol, since that can dry out the skin and make him look older. Finally finish with a moisturizer, anti-aging eye balm, and a moisturizing protective lotion. This 10-step self-care routine will put influencers to shame. This was during a time when influencers weren't even a thing. This routine is a very critical commentary on overconsumption and materialism, a recurrent theme in American Psycho. The way Bateman describes other people is also a very interesting thing to note. In particular, he disdains his male colleagues for outperforming him or having more flashy business cards. And I've already talked about just how much he hated women. In fact, in one such gathering with his colleagues, he proudly says that there are no girls with good personalities. This is highlighted much more glaringly in the book than in the movie. Marvelous verdict. Well, that was a seriously disturbing couple of minutes. American Psycho remains a cult classic and fan favorite for a number of reasons. But those who claim the movie is seriously disturbing probably know little about how disturbing the book actually is. The movie waters down a lot of the scenes to make it more palatable for the audience, but it still remains a very shocking watch that leaves the audience spellbound, and not in a good way. Of course, the brilliant acting by the cast members certainly brought a touch of realism to the movie, because there were times when we certainly felt like we were being hunted by Patrick Bateman. It's difficult to say which version is the better one, of course, since they both have their merits. The book offers a much more detailed account of the events and the social commentary, while the movie is relatively more paced and also enjoyable in some ways. Personally, I'd go for the movie, since it has a more casual setting and an entertaining hook, as compared to the book, which is downright horrifying and difficult to get through. Have you read the book? And if so, do you think it's better than the movie? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.